Hello. I'm going to go ahead and wait like a minute or two, just chill out, see if anybody's going to show up alive. Otherwise, I'll just get started with what I was planning on talking about today. So we're just going to chill for a minute. Well, hey, look, we've got some people. Hey, hi, Trudy. Hi, Jason, Rebecca. Welcome. I'm so excited that I'm not doing this just myself in my office. So thank you for showing up live. I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. For the record, since this recording will be like posted and available for people to look at later, I was going to do just a little bit of a spiel about myself for those who don't necessarily know me too well. I have been a writer since I was a little kid, and I've had the privilege to study writing since I was a kid. And I actually got my bachelor's degree in English with minors in both writing and film from Portland State University in 2008. And I have continued to study writing since then. I've studied both fiction writing and screenwriting. Welcome from work, Jason. Glad you're still listening. For future reference, if you guys have like general writing questions you want to ask me, you can submit them at a form I put on my website. So you just go to accountabilitymuse.com/winteriswriting, and I'll go ahead and put that into the chat. But obviously, if you have questions about what I talk about today, please like put it in the chat so I can answer them. Hey, Jeremy, welcome. So I'm also in the process of writing my first novel. I've been working on it for a couple of years now. It's actually in the hands of beta readers right now, which is incredibly anxiety-inducing and stressful because I can't work on it until I get feedback back. I've also studied 3D character animation, which has been really interesting and informative both for my writing and my dancing. And if you're super nerdy and want to see my reel, you just go to accountabilitymuse.com/winterisanimating, and my reel's up there. So today I was going to talk about the difference between genre or theme and story, because when I approach writing Rose City Swing, those are two very distinct things, and I need to consider what they both mean based on what people expect from a given theme. So if we take Rose City Swing Murder Mystery, last year, a murder mystery is both a genre and a story. So you understand what you're going to expect, because in a murder mystery, somebody's going to die and somebody's going to figure out who did it. Pretty simple, right? However, this year for Rose City Swing, Swinging in the Rain, we had a musical theme, and a musical is a set of expectations, but it's not a story, right? So, like, if you were to have shown up for Rose City Swing, Swinging in the Rain, and there hadn't been a single musical number, I think more than one person would have had my head. That would have been bad. So it was really important to include musical numbers. However, it did not necessarily automatically give me a story to work with. I could have tried to remake the story from the movie Singing in the Rain, But that would have been really difficult for a lot of logistical reasons, because so many of the story elements and gags in that film are based on the tech of talkies in the late 1920s, early 1930s, after The Jazz Singer came out in 1927. Did I mention I was a film minor? Anyways, so what I ended up having to do with Swingin' in the Rain this year was find my story, my the story that I would actually tell that would do justice to the musical theme and the Singin' in the Rain theme. And last year, Andrew Slack was kind enough to give me the compliment that Rose City Swing Murder Mystery felt like a Mel Brooks film. And I have adored Mel Brooks and his work since I was a kid. And that actually gave me the idea to take inspiration from his film The Producers and the later musical reimagining of it in 2005, starring Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, and use that as the story foundation for Swingin' in the Rain. And for those of you who have not seen it, the basic concept is Nathan Lane's character is a Broadway producer, not a very good one, and an accountant shows up to audit his books at one point, and this accountant is played by Matthew Broderick. And Matthew Broderick at one point has the idea that, like, oh, you know, under certain circumstances, you could make more money from a flop than you would from a hit, basically by overselling shares of the production and then making sure it's a horrible production that doesn't earn its money back, so nobody who funded the production gets their money back, and nobody goes looking for the money, right? So that's the basic setup of that film, and I thought it would be hilarious to put Brad, who as MC of Rose City, and is therefore often my main character, put him in a similar situation, right? So for those of you who were there, and I worked with Brad on this because I wanted it to be, comedy is more funny when it's rooted in truth. So I asked him, it's like, what would somebody hold over you that would be important enough to make you turn Rose City into a flop? And he ended up telling me about Rachel's grandmother's ring. And that's why that ended up being the kind of blackmail that we used against Brad this year. And so that was a lot of fun. If anybody has questions while I'm talking, please just throw them in the comments, by the way. And so that's kind of what it ended up being, and that's the difference between genre and story. Murder Mystery implied a story as well, but the musical did not, and that's how I handled it this year. And so going forward next year into Rose City Swing, the happiest event on earth, aka a Disney theme, it's a similar situation. That's a theme that has inherent expectations with it. So for instance, if you all show up next year and there's not a single Disney song, you're going to get mad at me. Trust me, I won't do that to you. Or also because we have the wonderful Larissa Tingle on staff, or I believe we will. She, if I didn't do anything with The Little Mermaid with her, somebody's going to get mad at me, including myself. Like that is a must do. So those are the things that I'm considering going into the Disney theme next year. It's like, what is my in? What is the story that I'm going to be telling in the context of that theme? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and I know that's not very much, but this is very like last minute. I wanted to see what people were interested in hearing from me about. So if you have any questions or like stuff you want me to talk about, please throw them over into the comments right now. Otherwise, while I'm waiting for some questions, I'll go ahead and like talk a little bit about my business, because not only am I a writer, but I'm a writing coach and a creativity coach, and I specialize in helping people tackle like their big dream projects. So like if you've always dreamed of writing a novel and you've never actually tried to do it, or you've never been able to finish it, like that's what I specialize in helping people with. So if anybody's interested in hearing more about that, you can direct message me. So For those of you who are just joining us late, I was talking a little bit about the difference between genre and story, where genre doesn't always imply a story inherently, whereas a story always has genre. So like in a murder mystery as a theme, oh, where does the humor come from? All right, I'll answer that next, Trudy. So I was talking about how a story always has genre, but a genre doesn't always have story. So in a murder mystery genre, that has a story attached because somebody dies, somebody's going to figure it out, right? But with a musical as a genre, that doesn't necessarily imply a story, which is why I had to go looking for one for Swingin' in the Rain. All right, so Trudy asked a really amazing and tough question. She said, my scripts are really funny. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And she asked, where does the humor come from? Humor actually comes from conflict. So a one-off joke can be funny, sure, but the kind of laughter that brings a room down really comes from setting up a situation of conflict between characters. And so we saw that the scene that I'm remembering from this past weekend was Friday night, Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better, between Brad and Robert Royston. And I had the idea for that song, and I had the idea that one of the things they could be competing over is how they pronounce a name, but otherwise, Brad wrote that song. But I set up the conflict between them as characters. Brad is trying to put on a flop. He's hired Ben Morris as his Don Lockwood, and Ben Morris can't or won't sing, and he's very reluctant about the situation. And then Robert Royston, the clear winner to play Don Lockwood in a production of Singing in the Rain, has been snubbed. And so you have Brad and Robert at odds with each other, and it's that conflict that spurs the comedy. So they acted out my entire script, but that's why the ad-libbing went above and beyond, because I gave them a situation in which they were at odds with each other, and that's actually what creates the comedy. It's often said that comedy is harder to write than tragedy, but it's actually been, I don't want to say easy because I don't want to simplify my role as writer, but having such amazing staff members playing my characters and knowing them fairly well and having access to Brad throughout the creative process, so I make sure I'm getting the characters right, allows for these unimaginable situations that I'm putting them in that are just funny. So does that answer your question, Trudy? It's really about conflict. And for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with what conflict might mean, I'll get super specific. It means that two characters have opposing, mutually exclusive goals to each other. And in that scene, the Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better scene, it was actually a really kind of a simplistic point of conflict. Brad wanted Ben as Don Lockwood, and Robert wanted to be Don Lockwood. It was kind of like an either-or situation. You couldn't have both. And that's what created the conflict between the two characters. Awesome. I'm glad that answered your question, Trudy. Are there any other questions? We've got lots of people here now, so like pick my brain. What do you guys want to know about me, my writing process, about what happened with Rose City Swing? I blocked off an hour for this, so I'm happy to just kind of like tell stories about the writing process, but I want to share what you guys want to hear. So please like put in the comments what you want me to talk about. Let's see. While I'm waiting for some more questions, I can talk about a funny story with the murder mystery last year that actually ended up making the story a lot better, even though in the moment that it happened, I was kind of super stressed about it. And it was when the promotional materials were put out and Bobak had listed the DJs all as witnesses, and we have a large DJ list at Rose City Swing. And I was like, that's too many witnesses. No, I have to kill them all. And so that's what I did. So that's why the death toll kind of doubled last year, but it ended up making the story so much more fun. And while it was more complex for me to write, it became much more enjoyable and zany and created some really fun experiences live at the event because so many people were dropping dead. So like what some people don't know is the Brad's triple step joke Saturday night last year at Rose City, that was all him and Forrest. They came up with that joke because at the time I saw it as 9 total murders, so I wasn't thinking it as 2 triple murders. So that's one of those interesting moments where my perspective as a writer, where I'm kind of seeing it as a whole, can sometimes make it harder for me to understand the minutia and the littler things that are going on. And that's an instance of the staff taking my script and making it so much better than I could possibly imagine. And it becomes a really collaborative effort, and it's incredible to watch. All right. Hi, everybody. So many people are here. Seriously, any questions? Because I feel kind of weird talking to my computer by myself with so many people here and not knowing what you want me to talk about. So, all right, nothing. So I'll just keep talking to myself like a crazy person. I've never done Facebook Live before, so thank you for being patient with me. Oh, we got a question. Isn't the ring pop great? That was my idea, because I'm like, we're not actually gonna use Rachel's grandmother's ring because A, she's wearing it, but I thought the ring pop was a fun idea. Ooh, okay. So Trudy asked, when a theme is chosen, how does that stimulate my brain and my writing process to come up with a story? So now that we know that the theme for next year is going to be Disney, I already had kind of a story in mind, but I think I'm going to move away from it. And what ends up happening for me is I look for stories within the genre that I could retell. So, for instance, with Swingin' in the Rain, while we were paying direct, overt homage to Singin' in the Rain from 1952, my in was finding a different musical with the story that I actually wanted to tell, which was The Producers. So right now, I actually had an amazing idea for the Disney theme next year that I don't want to spoil yet because I want to make sure it works before I start sharing it with people. I'm one of those writers where I kind of am very secretive about my ideas until I just can't keep them in any longer. And so there is a Disney-owned film from the past decade that I am thinking about applying for the Disney theme next year that would allow me the ability to use a lot of different characters from throughout the entire Disney canon and all the other franchises that they own. Because a lot of people have been pointing out that when you say Disney, kind of everything is up for grabs. You've got all the Disney princess films, you've got Marvel, you've got Star Wars. And while in the future, I would probably, if I were going to do Marvel, we'd like say that's the theme. If we were going to do Star Wars, we'd say that's the theme. But with Disney, kind of everything's up for grabs. And I really want to do my best to incorporate as much iconic Disney as possible. So my focus that I would prefer to use, Kingdom Hearts, yes, is I really want to get as many of the classic Disney films as possible. And it's important to me to include ones from every generation. So everyone who shows up at Rose City will feel represented in like the Disney film of their childhood, right? So like I don't want to just focus on like my personal nostalgic Disney. I know I watched The Little Mermaid so many times the VHS died. And I think my mom might actually be watching, so she could be like, yep, that's a true story. So I want to include as much variety as possible. And then the other thing that I am really careful to consider is actual demographic representation within those stories. Like I don't want to be just talking about like young white women or young white men. I want to like diversify, which can be hard to do when we don't have as diverse a staff as we possibly could. So that's like a line that I usually love referring to one of my dear friends, Rosie Thor. She is so smart and woke when it comes to like feminism and intersectionality and all that kind of stuff. So if I am ever like treading the line of something that could be really awful and offensive, I go to her and she helps like put me back in line so my storytelling doesn't hurt anyone, and that's really important to me. So I hope that answered your question, Trudy. I'm basically kind of going to spend my time watching or remembering Disney films for the next few months and seeing which story kind of begs to be told. And I have a feeling the one I came up with the other day might actually be perfect, but I'm afraid to share it yet. All right, Matthias asked a question. What is your strategy in writing the story so it's coherent from start to end? Tying up the ends together, for example, starting writing the ending first, or something like that? Ooh, awesome question. So for those of you who may not have seen it, I actually shared a post on the Swingin' in the Rain event page like on Monday about endings, because for me, it's always easier for me to write a story if I know what ending I want to have. And so for last year with the murder mystery, from the beginning, I knew that the story that I was trying to tell was Clue. And if you haven't seen the movie Clue, starring Tim Curry and Madeline Kahn and like so many greats of comedy, you need to stop what you're doing and go watch it as soon as you can. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I really wanted my ending to be reminiscent of the ending of that film, where Tim Curry is basically running around the mansion explaining all the events that have occurred and giving the answers. And it ends up being hilarious and zany. And the answers are kind of like an afterthought. And I really wanted to give Brad, who was my detective last year, an ending reminiscent of that. And it was interesting because I wrote it and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is great. And then I showed up. And for those of you who were there, we were all crying. We were laughing so hard. And I think my favorite was that Andrew Opershaw and PJ Turner were just tasked as extras to quote unquote apprehend Deborah, her character at the very end. So that was all they knew that was going on for that scene. So they were reading the script over Deborah's shoulder as she was reading her part, and together as a trio, they just kept kind of crumpling. They were laughing so hard and getting shorter and shorter and falling to the floor. And it was so incredible. I love that moment. That's like one of my favorite memories from last year. So yeah, me knowing what my ending is a huge part of my writing. Whereas this year, and I said in the Facebook post, like I struggled to find my ending, but then when it came and it actually became real, I realized, oh, that's what I wanted all along. I was just afraid to ask for it. And that was Robert Royston performing Gene Kelly's Singing in the Rain. I'm going to start crying if I talk about that too much, so I'm going to like bounce over that topic because I don't want to cry right now. But that was super meaningful to me. Now, as for how you actually structure it, proper storytelling is really about setting up expectations in the audience or reader's mind and then fulfilling them in a satisfying yet unexpected way. So for instance, when you set up a story where Brad is tasked with turning Rose City Swing, Singing in the Rain into a flop, the ending has to culminate in opening night, because that's what you're expecting. If it were to have stopped at dress rehearsal, that would have felt like unfinished, unwrapped up. So a lot of it is managing expectations and fulfilling them. So for those of you who were here from the beginning to hear me talk about my novel a little bit, I'm writing a fantasy novel set in kind of like an epic world. And it's with some readers right now for feedback, and I'm very specifically asking them the big structural questions. And every time they give me feedback at the end of a chapter, I'm like, what are the expectations that I just put in your mind in this chapter? And it's been really interesting to see where they, as readers, are experiencing the story different from me, the writer who knows everything. So that actually brings me to kind of the biggest job that a writer has. And I am actually amazed that I wasn't taught this until after college, when I took a really incredible professional screenwriting workshop from a writer who used to work for Ridley Scott. His name's Corey Mandel, and I highly recommend his writing workshops. But the biggest job as a writer is to make sure that the story that's playing in my head as a writer gets translated to the audience or the reader, right? Because if the audience or the reader is experiencing a different story than what I'm intending, I failed my first job, which is communicating the story accurately. Yeah? All right, I'm going to check the comments real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. How it should have ended, Disney Edition. Ha! Cool. Thank you, Matthias. Did that answer your question, Matthias? I kind of spat a lot of information at you guys based off of that one question. All right, I'm just gonna keep on talking. And again, if you're just joining and you want to know some stuff about my writing process, I'm here to answer questions. I plan on being here until 4 if y'all want to stick around. So you're welcome, Matthias. Yeah, so when I'm writing, I'm definitely an outliner. So there are two types of writers. There are outliners, and there are what are called pantsers. And that comes from writing by the seat of your pants, where you just kind of write and explore a story as you go and just see where it takes you. I prefer to outline a story and get my key story elements in a row so that they make sense, and then actually exploratory write in between them to fill that space. So that's why it's helpful for me to know the ending. And back to conflict, like I was talking about earlier, the other element is escalation. So a really funny thing happened this last weekend at Swinging in the Rain. Was after Friday night, so many people came up to me and were like, how are you going to top this next year? And I'm like, it's only Friday. We've still got Saturday and Sunday. Calm down. And that means I was doing my job right. So with Rose City, it's a really fascinating format to write basically a full stage production for a West Coast Swing event. And it's very convenient that West Coast Swing events are 3 days long, because it's very automatically Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And so Act 1, Friday night, is where I set up the whole story and I show the conflict and the who is at play in the story. And this year was fascinating because we had our protagonist, Brad Whalen, and we had 2 sets of villains. And I actually called Jordan and Tatiana the villains. They're the ones that were holding Rachel's grandmother's ring over Brad's head. And then we had the antagonists, who were not necessarily the villains, but they came about because of Brad's actions, and it became very natural. And then they were contending him, and they were actually the antagonists of the full story because they were present during it. So I want to make sure. All right, more people. So it's about escalating. So I set up the whole story Friday night, and then the trick is to satisfy that setup Saturday night, because at the end of Friday night this year, it became very clear that Robert Royston's character was super unhappy with Brad not hiring him for his production of Singing in the Rain, right? So Saturday night, if I had not followed up on that, it would have felt unfulfilling again, like I was missing something. So the next step was for me to make sure to highlight that and follow through with it. And so that's why at the beginning of Saturday night, you had Brandy and Deborah joining Robert, and they like combined their powers of evil to sabotage Brad. And that's really exciting, right? Because while that scene was super simple and it didn't necessarily get a lot of laughs, it was like a maniacal exposition scene, and Robert, Brandy, and Deborah did a beautiful job with it. And it was really important setup, because at that point in time, those three characters were working under the impression that Brad was trying to put on a hit. And so they needed to actually sabotage a hit. But after Brad's spotlight that night, those characters learned that Brad is actually trying to make a flop on purpose. So that's why they had an additional scene after the inspirational Jack and Jill, where they kind of process that information and then they redecide to sabotage Brad. But now that they understand he's trying to make it a flop, their sabotage means they're going to try to make it a hit. And this is what we call, in story structure, the midpoint. And I really love making sure my midpoints are on point. Oh man, the puns are coming out. Sorry. And a midpoint does its job when it not only escalates, but it really changes the nature of the game. Because the nature of the game Friday night was Brad's trying to turn it into a flop. And so you think you're going to get to opening night, and it's going to be more of what we saw in auditions, which is like Ben's talking in the rain. Oh, it was so good. Ben just like slew that bit. It was amazing. But if I had continued with that storyline, if I hadn't changed the stakes, it would have been like, okay, yeah, that's what we expected, but like, who cares? Where are the good musical numbers? And that's where I would have failed, because like you go to an event called Swingin' in the Rain and you don't see either Good Mornin' or Gene Kelly's Singing in the Rain, somebody's gonna like have my head. I need to include those things to meet the original expectations of the theme. And so that's why Saturday night is so crucial. It's to show that things have changed. But now Brad's job after Saturday night is harder because he's lost his original performers. They've been replaced with amazing ones. Nick, Mia, and Brian. Their performance of Good Morning was just so good. They went above and beyond, and I adore them so much. It was incredible. And so Brad's job was then harder, which led to the first scene Sunday, Brad and Forrest's rendition of On Your Own from Les Mis. I had originally hoped that Brad would rewrite Broadway ballet from Singing in the Rain, so instead of the lyric Gotta Dance, it would be Gotta Flop. But he had the idea to do On Your Own, and when he pitched it to me, I was sold. So I was like, go for it, have fun, and it was a genius. But that scene was his character's kind of dark night of the soul moment, where like all the obstacles are stacked against him, and for him to succeed and to get Rachel's ring back, he has to go above and beyond and be extra evil. And so that's kind of like how this story builds. I hope people are like following this, because I hadn't necessarily planned on talking about that, but that's kind of my thought process. It's about escalating and changing, and that's how you meet expectations while still being surprising. And when you find them, when you actually are there in the room and something happens, you're like, oh yes, I needed that in my life, but you weren't necessarily cognizant of it before. And that's the delicate balance of setting up expectations and meeting them while being surprising about it. I'm going to check the comments and see if I missed anything. Oh, Matthias asked if I usually come up with the story first or the characters first. This is very much a thing that is unique to every writer. Personally, I always start with, well, it depends on the story. So with any Rose City production, it always starts with character. And so last year for the murder mystery, I didn't want to make because I knew what I was doing in my head, but the staff like had no idea what I was preparing for them until like the judges meeting Friday night. The only people that were kind of in on it were Brad and Deborah. And then I kind of showed up at the judges meeting and handed out scripts to everyone. I was like, here you go, have fun. But the thing about last year is I wanted to make sure that every staff member's kind of given reason for wanting to murder Bobek and Trudy were kind of true to them. So I threw it at all the staff members. It's like, okay, what would be your zany reason for wanting to murder Bobek and Trudy? So when Tony got back to me saying that he wanted to murder them because their like collective muscle mass was greater than his, I'm like, that's hilarious. That's not something I would have come up on my own because that was like a very personal joke. And I think Larissa's reason had to do with her hair color. It was great. Oh, where was I going with that? Yeah, character versus story. So then I heard what Deborah's reason was for wanting to kill Bobek and Trudy, and I'm like, oh, there's my murder. I'm done. It was too good. And so that's actually how I started building the story last year, was knowing who my suspects were and their reasons why. And when I finally picked my person, Deborah, that's how the story started to evolve. And the other thing is, Forrest last year came back to me and said, he's like, do whatever you want. And like, bless Forrest. I adore writing for him. I was like, oh, thank you. I've got plans for this. Because I just know from personal experience attending events where both Brad and Forrest are on the mic, their chemistry together on the mic is just off the charts. And so I purposefully made Forrest the lead suspect for the first half of the story last year, because I knew that conflict between Brad and Forrest would just be off the charts funny. And Forrest nailed his performance during the Invitational that Saturday night last year. And that's actually where the midpoint came from, because for the entire first half of that story, Brad was set on the idea that Forrest was the murderer, which wasn't true. Forrest was innocent. So when Forrest is actually murdered at the end of the Invitational Saturday night, that's when everything changes. The nature of the story changes and the stakes went up because time is running out. So that's why I really love having the Invitational on a Saturday night at Rose City, because I can really use that moment to change the stakes of the story and escalate the conflict. So I forget why I started talking about that. I'm going to check the comments again. Hi, Janelle. It's so good to see you. Okay. Are there any more questions? Like I said, I'm here till 4. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else I could talk about. So for those of you who have joined recently, I'm basically just nerding out about my writing process, specifically in relation to Rose City Swing, both the murder mystery and Swinging in the Rain this year. I do plan on, if people are interested in me talking about this stuff, I plan on doing this repeatedly over time. So if you do have questions about my writing process or stuff in general, I do have a form you could fill out on my website. You just go to accountabilitymuse.com/winteriswriting. And I put it in like one of the first comments on the threads. You can scroll to that. So if you have a question beyond what we talk about today, just go ahead and like fill out that form and I'll talk about it on a future episode. How did I pick next year's story? Okay, so I actually haven't yet, and that's what we started talking about today. So for those of you who are late joining, earlier I was talking about the difference between a genre or theme and story. So all stories have genre, but not all genres automatically indicate a story. So last year, the murder mystery as a genre already indicated a story. It's like, oh, somebody dies and somebody's going to figure out who did it. But this year, a musical, that's just a set of expectations that there are going to be musical numbers, and I need to fulfill that expectation. But that didn't indicate a story. And it wasn't until I decided, oh, I'm remaking Mel Brooks, The Producers, that I had a story. So the same thing is happening this coming year, where we have this Disney theme, but that doesn't automatically indicate a story. And but I have had an idea, and it is technically Disney-owned film of a story that I can model. But I'm still toying with that, and I don't want to share spoilers yet. Cool. So hopefully that answered your question without being too repetitive for those of you who've been here a while. Are there any other questions about my writing and my nerdiness? I'm going to refer to my notes and see if there's anything else I can talk about real quick. Ooh, okay. So this is me getting super nerdy. Oh, all right. I'm going to answer Christine's question. How did I develop my writing skills? So I've been writing since I was a kid, and I've also had the privilege to study writing since I was a kid because my mom enabled me to write, and it was great. I actually got my bachelor's in English with minors in writing and film in 2008 from Portland State University, and I have continued to study writing since whenever I find a course or whatever. Probably the most monumental course I took was Corey Mandel's professional screenwriting workshop and the advanced workshop after that, because that changed how I really viewed writing as communication, getting the correct story into my audience's head that's out of my head. So it's all about communication. So yeah, so that's where that came from. I'm a super nerd, and I just love analyzing stories. I'm also that kind of person it's really hard to please me when I'm watching a story, like a movie or reading a book, because it's really easy for me to predict what's going to happen. You can just ask my boyfriend Robert. It'll be like, oh, I know what's going to happen. Why? Especially if it's like just really obvious, because once you really understand story structure, if writers are really writing by the book and using structure as a crutch instead of a tool to use to make educated choices, it really shows. And that's where you get like the movies or the TV shows that are just very predictable and that kind of stuff. And I like to use structure as a tool and not a crutch. Where do I want to go from here? I've been working on my first novel for a couple of years now, and it's in the hands of some alpha readers. And I am anxiously awaiting feedback because I miss working on it. I haven't been actively working on my novel since December, and it's been sad, and I really want to get back to work on it, but I need everybody's feedback first. So the other nerdy thing I was going to talk about is I really love applying the things I learn in writing and also animation. For those of you who are joined late, I studied 3D character animation for a couple of years. And if you're super nerdy and you want to see my reel, you just go to accountabilitymuse.com/winterisanimating, and I linked my reel on that page. And I love drawing parallels between writing and animation to dancing. So if we take like today's topic of discussion, which was genre versus story, and we apply that to West Coast swing, you can think of genre as the dance elements you expect in a given song. So if you have like a slow contemporary song, you're thinking flowing movements, right? If you have a fast blues song, you're thinking much more staccato movements and fast movements and footwork and stuff like that. Those are the elements that create expectation in a dance to those songs. Whereas story is actually how you arrange the elements in relationship to each other and in what order. So if you take a fast blues song and the entire, if it's a comp song, 2 minutes, if it's like a social song, the whole 3+ minutes, and you're just doing fast footwork the whole time, like sure, you're doing fast footwork, but that's not a good dance. You want to think about it. You want to think about actually purposefully arranging the elements to create contrast between themselves and escalation. So when I am constructing a dance, and I will say this is much easier as a leader than it is a follower. So when I'm constructing a dance, either on the fly as a leader or if I'm doing a choreography, I always think about it in terms of story. And for me, in dance, story means how big the elements are in relationship to each other and slowly escalating from there. So to oversimplify it, I always start a song with smaller movements and I grow to larger movements, or I contrast the two over the course of a phrase change, for instance. So that's me getting super nerdy, and I cross-reference my writing and my animation with my dancing all the time. Oh, Jason had a question. Did I miss it? Did I work with Bobak and Trudy on the schedule in any way to help the story? Were there any difficult obstacles dealing with that and working around the schedule? Ha! So that was actually an oversight this past weekend, and it worked out fine, but it's on the list of things to do to help make this schedule run smoother and definitely like on time. That's one of the things that I want to focus on, because it's really important to me that the story element of Rose City is additive and not intrusive. So next year, now that we know that this is like a thing, and I'm going to probably be doing this until I die, we're going to make a point of really arranging the schedule so that it allows space for the story in an additive but not an intrusive way, so people are still out the door on time and can have dinner on time, that kind of stuff. All right, did I miss any other questions? Thank you for the help, Matthias. But as an extension of that, because last year for the murder mystery, because nobody had any idea what I was doing in my head, I basically wrote it in a cave for a few months and then showed up and handed the script to everybody. It was really important for me to strategically write the murder mystery in such a way that it really didn't interfere with the event as it was running. So the majority of characters who had speaking lines only had one line and one cue. So that way it was really easy. So for instance, the example I often use is John Piper. Last year during the Invitational, I'm like, okay, you have to pretend to die from poison at the end of your spotlight. That's all you have to remember. And he nailed it. And then the rest of the scene worked. The only people last year who really had like in-depth lines were Brad and Forrest and Deborah. And obviously, as we move forward, this is something I'm learning, because last year I also had a full novella coinciding with the live scenes over the course of the weekend, because to do justice to a murder mystery, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, especially with that large of a cast of characters. And I didn't want to do that again this year, because that's a lot of extra work on my part to write a full novella along with the script. But what we learned this year was that what that allowed last year was making the live scenes a little bit easier to perform and block, because all of the complex setup happened in prose in the novella on the website. So it made the live scenes simpler to perform. Whereas this year there was no coinciding novella on the website over the course of the weekend. So all of the story elements had to take place live, which is why the production value and the blocking and the props got much more complex this year, was because I couldn't hide all that complexity in prose on the website this year. So that's something that we're going to work to improve on even more next year, because I don't want to overload our amazing staff with too much work, because they're already working so hard at a dance event. I will say, however, I told people explicitly, don't kill yourselves working too hard on this year, and they all went above and beyond. It was incredible to see. So, yeah. All right, still no additional comments, I believe. Any more questions? We've got like 10 more minutes before I'm gonna go run away and be an introvert to recover. So All right, I guess I'll just ask, have you guys enjoyed this? Because, like, I love talking about writing and my process and stuff, and I would love to do this again in the future. Because this is really my wheelhouse, and I don't really have the opportunity to share this with that many people. So I would love to keep doing this if y'all are interested. Awesome. I'm seeing thumbs up. That's encouraging. So I guess I'll just start doing some wrapping up. But again, if you have another question while I'm talking, just please put it in the comments. I want to talk a little bit more. Oh, you're welcome, Matthias. I want to talk a little bit more about my business because thanks, Christine. Because I really love helping other writers and creatives bring their dreams to life. And so if you or someone you know is kind of like in that space where they have a big creative dream, like a novel or a script or anything creative related, and that you want coaching to help actually get you from like day one all the way to done, that's what I do in my business. That's my life. And it's called Accountability Muse. And I'm happy to talk to more people about it. If you're interested in learning more, you can always direct message me. So yeah, that's kind of like my life in a nutshell. So yeah, this past weekend turned out to be so amazing. It was like beyond my wildest dreams. Ever since I was a kid, I've predominantly been a prose fiction writer, and then in high school I transitioned to script writing and learned how to write screenplays. But I'd never really oh, and also, odd note, I went to Ashland High School in Ashland, and my mom worked for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival for years and years, and so I had a lot of direct interaction with live theater. But I never really imagined I would somehow fall into live theater, let alone a musical, although I've always dreamed of writing a musical. And I just kept having to like have this moment over the past few months, like, I'm making a musical. Am I crazy? I felt crazy for the longest time, but then showed up to Rose City and everyone just knocked it out of the park. It was incredible. And it's funny, before last weekend, we were like, we're never doing a musical again, at least not for years. And then the theme ended up being Disney, and I'm like, ha, 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 ha. We just made our work so much harder for ourselves. But I know it's going to be amazing because everybody is so, so excited that it's just going to be incredible. And it's about a lot of my job right now is taking stock of what all expectations come with a Disney theme and making sure that in my writing I'm consciously meeting or exceeding all of those expectations. So there will be Disney songs. There will be shenanigans. The crazy part of me has also been wondering if I should animate something because that's in my wheelhouse. But so that's been my thought process so far going into next year. All right. Still no more questions. So yeah, I guess I'll do a little wrap up. Today we talked about genre versus story and how all stories have genre, but not all genres innately imply a story. And we talked a lot about Rose City Swing, both the murder mystery and Swinging in the Rain, and my thoughts for this coming year. Yes, shenanigans is one of my favorite words. It's a good word. I actually showed up Friday night being like, where are the staff shenanigans? And I was directed to the appropriate room to meet people. Do we need to make a road trip to Anaheim? I would not oh man, what word am I? I'm losing words at this point. I'm so tired. I would not mind a joint pilgrimage to Disneyland, maybe with Jack and Jill Rama. That'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Just saying. I'm a huge Disney freak. If y'all haven't noticed, there are 2 Stitches over my right shoulder. Stitch is my favorite character, so you'll be definitely seeing some Stitch next year. That's kind of like, if you know me, that's the only guarantee there is so far. So Shrek is not Disney. I'm sorry, very not Disney. I love Shrek, but not Disney. That's DreamWorks. Toothless is also DreamWorks, not Disney. Cool. So, any last minute questions? Otherwise, I'm just gonna call it a day. All right, so I'm gonna plan on just doing this maybe again next week or in 2 weeks, seeing how people are interested in it. And if you come up with any questions for me about writing or whatever, again, you can just go fill out the form on my website, accountabilitymuse.com/winteriswriting. Just send me your questions. When am I supposed to hear back about my book? So I told my alpha readers to have the book done by today, actually, and only 1 out of 5 has succeeded. So I'm hoping it'll be soon because I really want to get back to work on it. But it really is at that stage where I need objective external feedback on the overall structure of the story, because I don't want to worry about the line level items like a description of a door or something. That's not what I'm worried about right now. I want to make sure that the emotional catharsis at the end is really viscerally cathartic. Like, I want people to cry in one particular scene, and if they're not, I haven't done my job correctly. So I'm waiting for feedback before I can get to work on it. Thanks for asking. Was the animated film Sing Disney? You know, I don't think it was, but I did not see that one. It's actually been really interesting seeing how popular 3D character animation has gotten in the past few years, because there are so many more animation houses than there used to be, even just like 10 years ago. So we've got like DreamWorks, we've got, I think it's Illumination Entertainment. They did the, oh, my battery is running low. Please hold. They did the Minions movies. All right. Power crisis averted. I'm back. Got it. Get them to cry. I like making people cry. I'm totally one of those writers who's very mean. So I enjoyed killing all 9 staff members last year. That was great. And it was actually interesting because I was telling Robert, my boyfriend, before this last weekend, that someday I would love to be able to write well enough for Rose City that, yes, it's funny, but I want to make people cry. I want to have one of those Pixar moments at the beginning of Up, with that huge montage of his and his wife's life together and how just gets it right in the feels right from the start. Like, I want to provide that kind of catharsis for people at Rose City. But I was like, this is never good. Like, that's going to be a while before I feel strong enough as a writer to make that happen. And then Robert Royston comes out and gives like this performance and this story about Singing in the Rain and Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, and then just comes out and blows us all away with his rendition of it. And I don't know about you guys, but I was bawling my eyes out. It was amazing. So I have a notification. Snooze. All right. Fox and the Hound. I'm not that mean, but I don't know. I might be that mean. That's rough. I was actually at one point joking about Brad and Forrest being the Fox and the Hound, but that doesn't allow, as a story, as much inclusion with other Disney stories as the idea that I have right now. All right, cool. So it is now 4 o'clock. We have been nerding out about writing for an hour. I'm going to call it a day. Thank you all so much for being here. This has been amazing, and also like usually outside of my comfort zone. So thank you for being patient with me in my first Facebook Live and asking all your wonderful questions. I hope to do this again either in a week or two and just see where it goes. So yeah, again, if you come up with questions, just go to accountabilitymuse.com/winteriswriting and you can fill out really short form to just send me a question. And we'll see where this goes. And depending on how Bobak and Trudy feel about what level of information I'm allowed to share, I'd be curious to see what kind of sharing my writing process over the next year is like on this story. And we'll toe that line of too many spoilers and being transparent, because I want to include people in that. So thank you again. This has been amazing. I look forward to talking to y'all again. And yeah, awkward sign off. Thank you all. Have a great day.